This is the second video presentation for Chapter 26. This is Part 2 for Chapter 26. And just a reminder that the images within this PowerPoint are in the public domain. Give me a call if you have any questions or an email. Thank you. So to start off Chapter 26 Part 2 presentation, we're going to look at a couple of things here, starting with the mineral discoveries. So the 1849ers, before the Civil War, went to California. The 1859ers went to Colorado, and Pikes Peak, Leadville, and other places in Colorado. Gold was also then discovered in North Dakota, and then silver is discovered at Comstock Lode, where the Eldorados existed. Every third cabin was a saloon. Sweat-stained miners drank adulterated liquor, rot guts, in the company of very accommodating women out west in Nevada. So there's the Pikes Peak, and the miners' rush to the Wild West that helped to populate the Wild West, or the frontier, and then that had a direct effect on women, both out west, but also just in general in the United States. Women as well as men found opportunity in running boarding houses and working as prostitutes. They also found a lot more equality out west. The western states were the first states to grant women the right to vote. The Constitutional Amendment passing the right for women to vote does not occur until 1919, but in 1869, Wyoming, 1870, Utah, Colorado, Idaho, 20 and 30 and 40 years ahead of their time, ahead of the Constitution. So Wild West had many effects on women and culture as well. And the opportunity to make a lot of money with the cattle industry. Famous cities of Abilene and Dodge City, Wichita, Cheyenne. You also have this idea of, eventually, you have the settlers of the Wild West putting barbed wire fences up, and then this ends the free grazing opportunities of the West. But the cattle trails that developed, the famous ones are the Goodnight Loving Trail, went and originated in South Texas, ends up in Denver. You have the Western Trail. You also have the Chisholm Trail, famous in Kansas, eventually ending in Abilene and Ellsworth, but kind of going through Wichita, Kansas. And then you have the Shawnee Trail and other trails this way. There's a good video clip on Goodnight Loving with your video clip projects of Chapter 26. Because of the railroad construction, because of the cattle drives, because of gold discoveries, the mythical and sometimes exaggerated Wild West lent itself to some of these famous characters. The Dead Man's Hand of Wild Bill Hickok. Of course, you have then Wyatt Earp and Bette Masterson, Jesse James. All of these people existed. It's sometimes hard to document exactly what's myth and what's legend and what's accurate when it comes to some of these stories. But it's fun to take a look at all of these, and the movies are great. One of the more important aspects of the West was the Homestead Act, in the Homestead Act of 1862, and this, of course, allows for a quarter section to be allotted to any settler. A quarter section, of course, is 1/4 of a square mile, 160 acres, and the only stipulation was that the settler must live on it for 5 years and improve it. That might mean planting a hedgerow, putting up a fence, maybe putting a barn up, planting a few trees. It's kind of vague as to what improving it meant. and the registration fee, the nominal fee of $30, allowed for 160 acres to be given to any homesteader. It's very important in populating the West, this and the railroad and all the opportunity of the West. And again, you have then these posters that were put all over the world, all over the East Coast, all over Europe, all over the world, advertising this land of milk and honey. Of course, it was sometimes exaggerated, and there's a nice video clip that exaggerates the grapes the size of bowling balls, and lettuce the size of carriages, and you had corn cobs the size of horses in the land of milk and honey. Now, some of these settlers arrived out in Kansas and Nebraska and were quite shocked by the barren desert that it was. Nonetheless, the land was very appealing to the overcrowdedness of Europe and the European settlers that came to America. Other important contributors to the Wild West and the taming of this savage ground and taming it into civilized ground, John Deere and his steel plow that broke through this crust, and then the sod busters who poured onto the prairie using, of course, the steel plow. You had Glidden and his idea of barbed wire fence to help break up the grand prairie. And then, of course, you have this dry farming, this idea of farming that eventually contributes greatly to the Dust Bowl. But these are huge kind of industrial inventors and leaders to help make settling of the frontier easier. And next we have a couple of images of these settlers, homesteaders, some of them immigrants, settlers on Kansas, Oklahoma Panhandle, Nebraska, and the way they used the sod to build their home. A lot of these, of course, settlers didn't have access to a whole lot of other supplies, but here you can see in some cases the barn, of course, was attached to the home. And these are all family pictures of sod homes out in the Wild West. This would probably be a fairly nice home. It actually has glass windows. Another attribute to breaking up the frontier and this access of land, eventually Oklahoma had the land rush, in which certain amounts of land were opened up as kind of a race. You'd run out and you'd stake your claim, and whoever got to this ideal land first could claim it. Some people would actually kind of sneak past the line early, day or two before, and those were called the Sooners. But the boom, the land rush, was on in Oklahoma. This is a famous photograph then, as the gun goes off at high noon, and all of the settlers racing out to stake their claim in this Oklahoma land rush. Now, in the latter part of chapter 26, they kind of shift gears and start talking about the organizing farmers. Farmers started to get a little bit unhappy with the control that the monopoly in the railroad, the control that they had over transporting of crops, and so the railroad monopoly was tackled by the unhappy farmers. Farmers could not unionize as effectively as factory workers, but there were opportunities for farmers to cooperate together, and that's where the word co-op, the farmers' cooperative, come from. So the farmers take their stand, and farmers made up in nearly 1/2 of the population in 1890, but were hopelessly disorganized in the area of consolidation, economic integration, but they managed to organize politically. And so this National Grange and the Patrons of Husbandry, this became the Grange Movement, and they became politically organized to try to get political results, either candidates elected or laws formed. This Grange movement eventually merges with kind of a populist movement, and the agricultural brotherhood and its purposes we shall recognize no north, no south, no east, no west, united by the strong and faithful tie of agriculture. And one of the most popular mode of attack would be to organize into a farmers cooperative, and then in order to make sure that the railroads couldn't just gouge you on prices taking your grain to market, the cooperatives started constructing these grain elevators so they could store the grain until the railroad companies would lower prices. So in effect, a grain elevator, was a way in which the farmers could go on strike against the railroad and not be so maybe bound to the railroad's raising and lowering of prices. So at the end of chapter 26, they kind of lead this Grange movement into a merge with populism and say that the Grange was kind of this prelude to populism. And so the populists' platform, they wanted to nationalize the railroads, telephones, and telegraphs. They were interested in graduated income tax and unlimited coinage of silver. Some of these became absorbed into the populist movement of the late 1800s, early 1900s. And chapter 26 ends here with the election of 1896, and this is President McKinley eventually wins, defeating William Jennings Bryan, but both presidential candidates realized that they must pay attention now to this dawning of this populist movement, and some scholars kind of credit the Grange movement, the farmers' movement, as being an aspect of that. So that pretty much concludes part 2 of chapter 26 PowerPoint. Again, all the images are in the public domain within this presentation. Please do not hesitate to email or give me a call if you have any questions regarding this presentation. Thank you.